Hello. Live scene. So, as mentioned, for once we're on time. It is precisely 11 o'clock Central European time. Hopefully we're getting rid of that terrible echo from the last podcast. And live scene. So, hang on. We are going to have an echo here. And hopefully we should also be able to see live comments, so I doubt anyone will send us a live comment. I will just write hello. Oh, hello. Welcome to live comments. Let's see how that works. Okay, super. This is a podcast, a live stream, sorry, that I should not be doing, but I did want to get one last thing off of my chest and kind of complete the context of looking into Jacques Lacan. And the missing context was obviously Deleuze and Pierre Félix Guattari. And so I came across an article involving, of course, Slavoj Žižek and peripherally Alain Badiou, who normally I don't speak too much about. I do not want to criticize them too much. However, it's not really my cup of tea. But hey, if you're into Maoism and set theory as ontology, whatever works for you. So I don't want to criticize too much, but in order to get closer to Lacan and build our context a little bit more, we're going to have to look into that, and hopefully we'll do it very quickly this evening, like around 30 minutes max, and look in the Anti-Oedipus to the relation between Deleuze, Guattari, and Jacques Lacan, which is a little bit more complex than the critiques of Freud in the Anti-Oedipus, which is quite normal because Freud is he's born in the 18th century, and then Lacan comes on a little bit later. As we read a little bit of this basic, simple history of Lacan's biography, he came up towards psychoanalysis with a philosophical background. So Lacan is kind of a complex and clever guy, and that's something to be taken into account, the relationship between Deleuze and Guattari. I just want to make a quick shout out. We do not have too many followers. However, I would like to give a shout out on X or Twitter to people who are supporting us, whose names are Eleanor and Bella. So thank you very much for your support, and we appreciate everything and are happy and hope we can in some ways be useful to you. And in doing that, I have now completely lost my material here. Here we go again. And so let's get into this very quickly. I'm going to be reading just a few bits from an article. Let me lower the volume a little bit here. Again, is pretty high. That might be better. A little bit higher. What we have here. Hang on. Here we go. This is a paper from 2009. So some time has passed, obviously, called Schizophrenizing Lacan, Deleuze, Guattari, and Anti-Oedipus. In 1972, as we all know, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's Anti-Oedipus exploded like a bombshell on the French intellectual scene, unleashing an extended polemical attack upon the foundational elements of orthodox psychoanalysis and Marxism. It quickly became a bestseller. While the primary target of the book was Freud, the innovative theories of Jacques Lacan did not emerge unscathed. And as we have seen, Pierre Félix Guattari was a student and the supposed heir apparent of Jacques Lacan before they had a quite well-known falling out with each other. So, because of the brevity of their critique, many have interpreted Deleuze and Guattari's relationship to Lacan as one of antagonism and rejection. This, however, obscures many important connections that they maintained with Lacan, and their insistence they were actually extending Lacan's theories to their necessary conclusions. Through an analysis of Anti-Oedipus in relation to core Lacanian theories, this paper will investigate how Deleuze and Guattari transform Lacan, both faithfully and unfaithfully, to give support to their utopian project. So, as the years pass, and as we tend to kind of synthesize everything, things tend to get into kind of a black and white world. However, in reality, Deleuze and Guattari's relation to Lacan is more of a gray area, as it also is with Freud, because Deleuze and Guattari are not entirely rejecting Freud. They applaud him for his discovery of the unconscious realm, the unconscious state. They critique him, saying, he came so close to getting it right, but Freud always fell back onto structuralist kind of symbolism. But it's absolutely not a total rejection, and there's obviously respect for Freud and his work. However, they reject, as post-structuralists, the symbolicism and free association that Freud employed. So nothing is so black and white as it always seems. So, in a style that Deleuze and Guattari would affirm, we will not start in the 70s. So this article will not start in the 1970s, but it will start in contemporary events. This is 2009, to elucidate the stakes motivating this inquiry. In the fall 2004 edition of the journal Criticism, a debate unfolded about the relationship between Deleuze and Lacan, centering around two reviews of neo-Lacanian Slavoj Žižek's subversive study of Deleuze, Organs Without Bodies, and the response by the author. The short debate ironically revolved around a larger absent signifier. One might even say a phallus-like organ without a body, that established or dissolved the connections between the Deleuzian and Lacanian projects. So once again, without getting too much into Žižek's criticism of Deleuze and Guattari, the famous BWO, body without organs, concept established by Deleuze and Guattari, according to Žižek, could say that it was a phallus-like organ without a body. So that bracketed term was Guattari, the man who tore, and this I found very, very interesting, curious. That bracketed term was Guattari, the man who tore Deleuze from a good Lacanian trajectory, or the man who helped him realize it. In Organs Without Bodies, Žižek polemically took up the former position, saying that Deleuze was infected, I repeat, infected, that's a very, very strong word, by Nonetheless, his collaborations with Pierre-Félix Guattari and Gilles Deleuze was Guattarized, according to Slavoj Žižek. So, once again, let's repeat this. According to Slavoj Žižek, in his book Organs Without Bodies, I believe, Žižek states that Deleuze was on the path of being a good Lacanian. However, he was infected by the quote-unquote evil thoughts of Pierre-Félix Guattari. And Žižek claimed that Deleuze only turned to him for help, but to Guattari, because he had reached a philosophical impasse and was looking for an easy escape. So let's go on. Patience is obviously a virtue. Žižek reads in Deleuze's corpus two different ontologies, one engaged with his solo work and the other in his collaborations with Guattari. Well, as I repeated, we do not want to critique too many people, but I mean, the immediate response is no fucking shit. If you're writing a book on your own, or you're writing a book as a collaborative work, it's obvious that there's going to be differences. And as we have gone over a great deal in our podcast, Deleuze was interested in reducing his self to nothingness, to go into a state of pure becoming, where he renounces completely the I, and therefore renounces authorship from a certain point of view, and then is in a state of becoming where the end result is there's no specific author that you can identify. Also, Žižek states that there are two different ontologies, but reading again Anti-Oedipus, I find this hard to understand, because I believe that the ontology is absolutely consistent on Deleuze's part. However, yes, the more psychoanalytical issues are clearly done by or enriched or done by Guattari, which to me seems quite normal. If you do a collaborative work between a philosopher and a psychoanalyst, logically, that would be the answer. So, moving on. The proper Lacanian position presents the event as an effect of primordial causes. So we saw that last night. The real, perfectly consistent with philosophy, the history of philosophy, empiricism, Immanuel Kant, etc. Or rather as the eruption of the Lacanian real within the domain of causality. Okay. The second, the philosophically contaminated position, affirms the event as a continuous virtual process of production that creates the discontinuous structures of the actual. Žižek sees Deleuze struggling between these two positions in his last book prior to meeting Guattari, The Logic of Sense. But the publication of Anti-Oedipus marks a decisive turn away from the former position in favor of the latter, a turn that Žižek sees as largely precipitated by Guattari's radical politics. Anti-Oedipus, in Žižek's eyes, therefore marks a critical turn away from Lacan, and is worthy of being dismissed as arguably Deleuze's worst book. Okay, so once again, let's just look over this. The first position which would be the proper Lacanian position, which, according to Slavoj Žižek, sorry, but that was juggling with in his logic of sense, would be the event as an effect of primordial causes, or rather as the eruption of the Lacanian real within the domain of causality. So I think we could describe the domain of causality as the actual in Deleuzian terms, the material world, the sensory manifold, and this would be an effect of the unconsciousness in Lacanian terms, which in Deleuzian or philosophical terms would be the unconsciousness, going back to David Hume, being constantly in a pre-conscious state, being affected by the sensory manifold, the world essentially, and the subject on an unconscious level. And then later that will erupt into the domain of causality. So we saw that last night looking at the Lacan's, one of his first fascinations was mimicry. And mimicry is something that erupts out of your unconsciousness, and then it comes into your consciousness, and then you can talk about causality, cause and effect. But for Lacan, underneath that, it all comes from this kind of primordial soup of your unconsciousness, which is constantly being affected and affecting the surrounding sensory manifold, etc., etc. So Žižek says, on one hand, Deleuze in the logic of sense was juggling with that, together with a second philosophical definition of an event, which Žižek claims was contaminated, which affirms the event as a continuous virtual process of production that creates the discontinuous structures of the actual. So affirms, so the second option, one, we have this kind of unconscious soup that is just, in contact with the real, the sensory manifold, that once it erupts into our consciousness, that is an event, and that causes causality, terrible example. I'm not good at examples, but I had a dream last night that, oh my God, I don't know, I had a terrible dream, and then I woke up, and that erupted into my consciousness, and I decided to stay home all day because the dream was so terrible. I was convinced, something terrible was going to happen or something like that. Terrible example, but, from the unconsciousness, something erupts into your consciousness when you wake up, and that will lead you into causality, and therefore that causality will be effect of what you dreamed about in your unconscious state. So the event erupts, and whatever you do is going to be an effect of that primal cause, which is what happened in your unconsciousness. And then maybe you will act accordingly. Once again, the famous example we saw last evening was mimicry, and how young children, like many animals, tend to mimic images outside of them, other images of others, and they tend towards a form of mimicry, which is not necessarily rational or logical. So the second process, which is the contamination of the true Lacanian enlightenment, according to Deleuze. The second position is contaminated and not in line with Deleuze, with Lacan, in where the event is continuous, is continuously occurring in a virtual process, which is a productive process, and it is that creates the discontinuous structures of the actual. So even that, it's not even really a good explanation if you look at it, but because if you think about it, the first position, the proper Lacanian position according to Zizek, the unconsciousness is in a constant state of production. It's constantly movement. It's constantly being affected to the world. It's never stopping. It's continuous, and then voila, something erupts into the conscious mind. Zizek is saying the second, the contaminated, bad conception of the event, which is not in line with Lacanian theory. It means the event is a continuous virtual process of production that creates the discontinuous structures of the world. So I think what Zizek, I repeat, I really don't spend too much time trying to interpret him, because honestly I don't really think it's worth it, but it is important to look into Lacan to gain kind of a kind of context for this. What we're saying here is this virtual process. You could say the unconsciousness is a continual productive process, not just a radical chaos, that at the same time is not erupting into the real, the actual. It's something that is constantly producing in parallel with the real, and it is creating the structures in the real, which would be discontinuous. So, as contrived as that may seem, the important point to understand here is that Zizek is criticizing Deleuze, saying that in a logic of sense, he was juggling with a correct interpretation of Lacanian theory and an incorrect, contaminated theory, and it was Felix Guattari's fault, essentially. But, however, the example they're giving, I do not find these kind of dichotomy or inconsistencies. But however, we all knew that Zizek had to distinguish himself in one way or another, and at the time, the easiest way to do that, of course, was to follow the path that he did. So, in the end, Zizek concludes that it was Guattari's radical politics that contaminated Gilles Deleuze and pulled him away from the correct Lacanian path. And therefore, Anti-Oedipus, according to Zizek, is arguably Deleuze's worst book. And I think correct English would be worst book, but little does it matter. So, Smith, in his review of Zizek, challenges this perspective, calling into question whether Deleuze's move towards Guattari and Anti-Oedipus was really a rejection of Lacan. Citing an interview Deleuze gave us shortly before his death, Smith argues that Lacan actually saw the transgressions of Anti-Oedipus as a continuation of his work. In the interview, Deleuze recounts being summoned by Lacan a few months after the publication of Anti-Oedipus. In their meeting, Lacan denounced all of his disciples, with the exception of one, calling them all worthless, and then told Deleuze, "What I need is someone like you." Oh my goodness, this is getting kind of morbid here. Lacan biographer Elizabeth Rudinesco recounts the same story but complexifies the issue, claiming that at the same time Lacan was praising Deleuze, he was also grumbling about him to Maria Antonietta Maciocchi. Lacan was convinced Anti-Oedipus was based on his seminars, which already, according to him, contained the idea of a desiring machine. From these stories, we can see that Lacan himself saw a clear connection between his project and that of Deleuze and Guattari. Just out of curiosity, he was grumbling about him to Maria Antonietta Maciocchi. Let's take a quick look and try and discover who this Maria figure is. Just to understand a little bit better, Maria, I have to switch to Italian here. Maria Antonietta Maciocchi was a deputy of the Republic of Italy from 1968 until 1972, and then worked in the Euro Parliament from 1979 to 1984. Born in 1922 in Rome. She was a writer, journalist, and Italian politician, and was one of the first exponents of the Partito Comunista, the Communist Party, and then the Partito Radicale, the Radical Party, etc., etc. So Maria began out as a communist. Then she moved towards China. In 1971, she traveled to China and wrote a book of 560 pages called From China, in which she praised the socialist paradise in the Chinese Empire, and her positive judgment regarding the Cultural Revolution in China was heavily criticized by many members of her same Communist Party, and therefore they removed her from the Italian Communist Party in 1972. So she left Italy and went to Paris, and spent time interviewing many famous intellectuals, obviously one of them being Jacques Lacan. She became a teacher in 1972 at Paris 8 Vincennes, and she even finished her doctorate in political sciences at the Sorbonne. So she broke with the PCE, which is the Italian Communist Party, and then just kind of went on doing works of her own. So good, and we now know who Maria Antonietta Maciocchi is. And let's go back very quickly. So Lacan, after the publishing of Anti-Oedipus, was convinced that it was based on his seminars, and according to him, he invented the concept of the desiring machine. So I think, given the title of our podcast, Deleuze Modeste, I think, once again, I don't want to be critical, but anyone who understands the idea of modesty and humility will kind of understand the nature of the characters we're dealing with here, which doesn't mean they're wrong or their works aren't valid. On the contrary, but going ahead, in several interviews after the publication of Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze and Guattari reiterated their belief that they saw themselves as remaining faithful to the Lacanian project, and that they both owed so much to Lacan. This, however, did not stop them from transforming certain problematic notions that they saw as barriers to the development of a truly materialist psychiatry, as Deleuze put it. I felt it would all work even better if one found the right concepts instead of using notions that didn't even come from Lacan's creative side, but from an orthodoxy built up around him. Lacan himself says, "I'm not getting much help." We thought we'd give him some schizophrenic help, and there's no question that we're all the more indebted to Lacan once we've dropped notions like structure, the symbolic, or the signifier, which are thoroughly misguided and which Lacan himself has always managed to turn on their head to bring out their limitations. So, good. I'm just going to spend 5 minutes here but this is actually why I wanted to do this streaming this evening, to kind of close out the context of Lacan, not only in relation to psychoanalysis and contemporary society, but also specifically to Deleuze and Guattari. And I think this is the key point here. I'm going to go on a little bit, but we can sort of drop our dear friend Slavoj out of the picture here, because he's, like we saw last night, he's taking Lacan, also Lacan's Hegelianism, and creating, let's say, his own unique identity and applying that to contemporary society, which in part I don't criticize. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but for example, Zizek is saying that ideology is everything. No, ideology is our conscious mind creating fictive constructs that justify a completely discontinuous and ruptured Lacanian real. And like the examples we gave last night was going beyond consumerism. Maybe like if we're going to elections, and I know that a certain candidate, or even maybe all of the candidates, are absolutely worst case scenarios. Consciously, many people will tend to ideologize and create kind of these fictive justifications or ideologies justifying why, kind of rejecting or putting their heads in the sand, or ignoring the very chaotic structure of the real. And I think we can witness this in 2024 all around the world quite clearly. So, on one hand, Deleuze and Guattari in Anti-Oedipus are rejecting ideology 100%, saying ideology never did exist, and it is absolutely nothing real. No, and from their point of view, in my opinion, that is correct. However, not all people have read Deleuze and Guattari, and not all people are well versed on Freud and Lacan. And many people in contemporary society, not to criticize them, but they are not operating as desiring machines, operating virtually in a productive. No, most normal people are just living their lives, and therefore the critique that Zizek applies to kind of just normal people and the role of ideology is somewhat valid. No, we are not all schizophrenic revolutionaries, as Deleuze and Guattari, in a kind of utopian sense, would have hoped. We are not yet, but as capitalism goes on, we will be pushed further and further into psychosis, into schizophrenia, and we may all become schizophrenics. But still, society is moving from neurosis to psychosis, schizophrenic in a certain sense, but not entirely. So a lot of people behavior can be described through Zizek's employment of ideology. So I don't really have a huge problem with that. But I think at this point, the really important thing is that we can just kind of take Zizek very slowly and just push him out of the picture, because what we know now is that despite whatever his statements are in his books, etc., that the relationship between Pierre Félix Guattari and Lacan was very, very strong before they had a falling out and they argued. And we know the basis of that was that Lacan saw psychoanalysis as essentially a relationship between the analyst and the analysand, the patient, and Guattari believed it was a social condition and therefore had to be treated in a social way, meaning that in Guattari's clinic, he would force his doctors to live all day with the patients, and the patients would spend most of their time together in group therapy. And for Lacan, that was absolutely forbidden. It's just the master, the analyst, and the patient, the analysand, and that's it. So that was one, I'm sure, of the many reasons they broke up. And the relationship between Deleuze and Lacan is absolutely not as Zizek tries to paint it. It's like Deleuze was contaminated by Guattari and lost the good path of Lacan in order to follow his own bad contaminated path thanks to Pierre Félix Guattari, which is absurd. Once again, we don't want to critique people, but I think our point of the podcast is Deleuze Modeste, thinkers, humble people, modest people. If you understand, read between the lines, you already know, it's not who's good or who's bad, who's right or who's wrong, but who's honest and who's dishonest, That's kind of the central issue, but enough of that. But our point is there is, I believe, a rich relationship with Lacan and Deleuze and Guattari. And this is already in the 1970s and way before Zizek's attempt to distinguish himself and give him, his own unique philosophical identity, and rejecting Deleuze and embracing Lacan and Hegel, etc., which is perfectly his right to do. And but the point is, there's a whole discourse before which precedes Zizek, who's kind of doing more harm than good to the understanding of the relationship between Lacan to the anti-Oedipus, and also to Guattari, and also to Deleuze. So, as you just read, I mean, I actually find that quite beautiful. I'm going to read it again. This is Gilles Deleuze. I felt it would all work even better if one found the right concepts, instead of using notions that didn't even come from Lacan's creative side, but from an orthodoxy built up around him. Lacan says, I'm not getting much help. So Lacan himself understood this kind of lack of conceptual reinforcement, let's call it. So we thought we'd give him some schizophrenic help. There's a little bit of irony in that, no doubt, and there's no question that we're all the more indebted to Lacan once we've dropped notions like structure, the symbolic, or the signifier, which are thoroughly misguided, and which Lacan himself has always managed to turn on their head to bring out their limitations. So they're kind of saying, yeah, Lacan has a lot of very important ideas and things to say. He himself, Lacan, admitted that he's not getting much help, and he was kind of patiently working to demonstrate the limitations of certain concepts which were orthodox. He just didn't go all the way, according to Deleuze. And obviously, those limitations were the extreme limits of symbolism and structuralism in psychoanalysis. So another 2 minutes here. I'm sure I'm boring you to death. Let's check out our live comments. No live comments. Ask me anything. Well, not anything. Ask me something. No, actually, don't ask me anything because I am absolutely not an expert here. My keyboard doesn't work. Can we have an eye? It gave us an eye. Thank you. Ask me something, not anything. While Deleuze is being a bit facetious, as I mentioned, a little bit ironic, such a transformation of Lacan would seem to leave him rather amputated. This interview illustrates the complicated relationship that Deleuze and Guattari maintained with psychoanalysis generally. Even though Anti-Oedipus was a polemic attack on a key psychoanalytic theories, it was more of an internal reversal than a rejection, and it was their intention to move beyond psychoanalysis to what they called schizoanalysis. Deleuze and Guattari therefore maintained many key analytic concepts like the unconscious and repression, transforming them to give support to the revolutionary and utopian paradigm. So, to gain a sense of appreciation for the transformative potential of Anti-Oedipus, one must set aside, like I said before, Zizek's call for a rejection of Guattari in the name of saving Deleuze's Lacanianism, which I was trying to put it more politely, but let's be frank now, he's Zizek's pathetic, absurd point of view that Deleuze was not a good Lacanian. I mean, do you really think like a philosopher has to fall in line and then become a good Lacanian? I mean, instead of creating concepts, practicing philosophy, I mean, it's just nuts. Anyway, we're still going to try and bite our teeth here. One must set aside Zizek's call for rejection of Guattari in the name of saving Deleuze's Lacanianism and instead engage, thank you very much, with the multiple becomings that were produced through the introduction of Guattari into the equation. Oh, finally, something sensible. Guattari was, after all, a trained and practicing psychoanalyst, one who had studied with Lacan for many years. And while Deleuze and Guattari's position towards Lacan ended up navigating a thin line between fidelity and betrayal, Deleuze, Guattari, and Lacan all emerged from the project transformed. So, I will stop here. I would love to go on further. In a future date, we will get more into this, but I think in these 3 live streamings, we started off kind of rough, no? Just a little bit, trying to understand, orient ourselves towards Zizek's mostly obfuscating use of Lacan in criticizing contemporary society through ideology, Lacanian's real and the original repression, etc., etc. And in parallel, we started looking at the origins and development, the biography essentially of Jacques Lacan. We did that again last night. We looked a little bit deeper into Zizek and spent a little more time in the origins of Jacques Lacan, his philosophical origins, his being a great fan of Baruch de Spinoza as a young man, his encounter with the surrealists, the surrealisms, his kind of bon ton upbringing in the upper echelon elite of the Parisian cultural elite, and his beginnings of psychoanalysis, his inspirations from Claire Rimbaud, the 18th century French psychologist, about automatic language and the unconscious, which can provoke, let's say, these events of us, people just kind of randomly speaking without even understanding what they're saying because it's coming from the unconsciousness. And then we looked a little bit more into the first important psychoanalytic concept of Lacan, which was mimicry, or the mirror stage, which is something that every child goes through, and that is essentially the identifying of a child, but not only itself through an external image. And I think tonight we just kind of close the loop. So we've looked into essentially to try and understand, this kind of very complex relationship between Deleuze, Guattari, and Lacan, and hopefully we can set our dear friend Slavoj Žižek aside, as he's absolutely simplifying a very complex subject in order to whatever. I'm not interested in that. And but there was a relationship, a very interesting and complex relationship between Gilles Deleuze, Pierre-Félix Guattari, and Jacques Lacan. So we will shut off here, and thank you once again for all or anyone watching us. Last chance for live comments. I'm gonna do an emoji. Goodbye, everyone. Now, why is not working on my keyboard? I think I need a keyboard. Goodbye, everyone. Let's punch things out. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much for following us. And until next time, have a lovely evening, everyone. And above all, a great week.